Did you know your brain is literally wired to prefer making less money if it means avoiding financial risk? It's not just a feeling, it's a primal command sabotaging your wealth. This is the moment most people rush, so let's slow it down. Think twice, Tony. Let's imagine our friend, a guy who's been at the same job for 5 years. It's stable, comfortable, and frankly, a bit predictable. He's earning an all-right salary, enough to get by, but not enough to really get ahead. The rent gets paid, the car runs, and there's always enough for takeout on Friday night. He's got a solid routine. Now an opportunity pops up. His former colleague, who started their own tech startup a couple of years ago, offers him a position. The pay at the startup is initially a bit lower, maybe 10–15% less than what he makes now. But the upside is huge. Equity in the company, potential for rapid growth, and exciting, innovative work. It could be life-changing money in a few years. So what do you think happens? He hesitates. He overthinks. He starts to list all the reasons not to take the leap. The stability of his current job suddenly feels like an unshakable fortress. That slightly lower initial salary at the startup, it looms like a chasm. His brain is screaming, "Don't do it! Don't lose what you have!" Even though he knows deep down this could be his ticket to true financial freedom. He probably stays. Why? Because of something called loss aversion. Our brains are wired to feel the pain of a loss about twice as strongly as the pleasure of an equivalent gain. Think about it. Losing $100 feels worse than finding $100 feels good. It's an evolutionary survival mechanism. Back in the savannah, losing your meager food supply meant death. Finding a little extra? Nice, but not as critical as avoiding starvation. This ancient wiring still dictates our modern financial decisions, even when it no longer makes sense. It's why we cling to underpaying jobs, stagnant investments, and missed opportunities. The comfort of the known, even if it's suboptimal, outweighs the potential gains of the unknown. It's also tied to the status quo bias, which is just a fancy way of saying we prefer things to stay the same. Changing jobs, starting a new business, investing in a new asset class, all these require effort and introduce uncertainty. Our brains, being energy-efficient machines, would rather keep things exactly as they are, even if as they are means leaving thousands or even millions on the table over our lifetime. So how do we outsmart this ancient, well-meaning but ultimately wealth-sabotaging brain of ours? We need decision filters, tools to help us think clearly when our emotions are trying to steer the ship. Let's dive into some of these Think Twice, Tony filters. Filter number 1. What's the real risk of inaction? We often focus solely on the risk of doing something new. But what about the risk of not doing anything? Staying in that stable but underpaying job? The risk isn't immediate, like losing money in a bad investment. The risk is slow, insidious. It's inflation eroding your savings over time, making your dollar worth less each year. It's the lost opportunity cost of not investing that money into something that could grow. It's your skills becoming outdated because you're not exposed to new challenges. The safe option can often be the riskiest path in the long run. Filter number 2. What's the worst-case scenario? When facing a risky decision, our brain tends to catastrophize. We imagine total financial ruin, living in a cardboard box and eating ramen noodles for the rest of our lives. But take a deep breath and define the actual worst case. If our friend takes that startup job and it fails, what really happens? Does he go bankrupt overnight? Probably not. He might have to dip into his emergency fund, look for another job, and maybe his savings take a hit. Could it set him back a year or two? Yes, possibly. But is that truly catastrophic in the grand scheme of a 40-year career? Often the worst-case scenario isn't nearly as bad as our lizard brain makes it out to be. And if you can survive the worst case, then the risk is usually worth taking. Filter number 3, the regret test. Fast forward 10 years. Which decision are you more likely to regret? Taking the risky startup job that didn't quite pan out, or staying in the safe job and watching your former colleague become a millionaire? Most people regret the things they didn't do far more than the things they tried and failed at. The sting of a lost opportunity lasts much longer than the pain of a temporary setback. This isn't to say every risk is worth it, but when the upside is significant and the downside is manageable, the regret test often pushes us towards action. Filter number 4. Is it a risk or a calculated bet? There's a huge difference between gambling your life savings on a lottery ticket and investing in a well-researched, diversified portfolio. One is blind hope, the other is a calculated decision based on probabilities and information. When our friend considers the startup job, is he just blindly jumping, or has he researched the company, spoken to other employees, understood the market, and evaluated the leadership? The more information you gather, the more you turn a risk into a calculated bet. And calculated bets are how successful people build wealth. Filter number 5. Does this align with my long-term goals? It's easy to get caught up in the immediate comfort or discomfort of a financial decision, but true financial success isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. What are your ultimate goals? Is it early retirement? Funding your kids' education? Starting your own business one day? Does taking a slight pay cut now for potential equity and growth align better with those long-term aspirations than staying put? Sometimes a short-term loss or discomfort is a direct investment in a much larger, more fulfilling long-term gain. It's about understanding that the path to wealth often isn't a straight, smooth road. It has detours, hills, and sometimes even a few unexpected potholes. Our brain, in its effort to protect us, often tells us to avoid those bumps entirely, but those bumps are often where the biggest opportunities hide. So the next time you feel that tug, that primal urge to cling to the comfortable, the familiar, even if it's underpaying you, remember Tony. Remember these decision filters. Don't let your ancient brain sabotage your modern wealth. Instead of letting fear of loss dictate your choices, empower yourself with clear thinking. Ask yourself, what's the real risk of doing nothing? What's the actual worst-case scenario, and can you handle it? Will you regret inaction more in 10 years? Is this a blind risk or a calculated bet based on good information? And most importantly, does this path truly align with your biggest, boldest long-term goals? Because when you start asking these questions, you stop being a victim of your primal brain. You become the director of your own financial story. And that, my friends, is how you avoid regret and build the wealth you truly deserve. So before you make your next big financial move, remember to slow down and think twice, Tony. Don't just react, reflect. Your future self will thank you for it. If this video helped you understand your brain's sneaky tricks, hit that like button and subscribe for more clear-thinking finance tips. And tell us in the comments, what's a financial risk you took that paid off, or one you regret not taking? Let's learn from each other.